Alisa Liu just silenced every rigid sports coach out there. Just 48 hours after claiming gold wearing her shimmering golden gown, she glided onto the ice in a stunning dark blue jeweled dress with a coordinating choker for the gala exhibition. And the moment the music hit, not some classical symphony, but a track by Pink Panther and Zara Larsson called Stateside, the entire stadium absolutely erupted because this was not merely a celebratory skate. This was a declaration, a message sent loud and clear that Alisa herself handpicked that song. Not her trainers, not her choreographers, not some corporate sponsor giving their stamp of approval. Because traditional Olympic gala exhibitions are notorious for their classical compositions, their refined movements, and their carefully calculated safe selections where athletes perform whatever their support teams instruct them to. But Alisa flatly refused that script and instead grabbed a track that had blown up on TikTok, designed moves that were playful and flirtatious, and essentially transformed the Olympic Gala into a full-blown Gen Z concert moment. And being the closing performer of the entire exhibition, she leveraged that spotlight to broadcast her message as boldly as possible, skating entirely on her own terms and nobody else's. And what amplified the whole thing even further was that NBC had aired footage of Pink Panther personally sending Alisa a heartfelt video message saying she found Alisa deeply inspiring, and that figure skaters had been her childhood obsession. And following the performance, Pink Panther took to Instagram calling Alisa incredible and referring to her as her good sister, while Zara Larsson posted a clip of herself watching the performance alongside friends. And the whole thing detonated across social media, racking up millions upon millions of views, because this was the very first occasion a figure skater had transformed the Olympic ice into a cultural moment that authentically belonged to her generation, which is precisely what makes it so groundbreaking, because Alisa has stated this over and over again, that nobody tells her what to do. And those 4 words summarize absolutely everything about her extraordinary comeback. Given that just 2 days before the gala, she had captured Olympic gold as the first American woman to accomplish that feat in 24 years, since Sarah Hughes did it back in 2002. But the gala was where Alisa truly demonstrated what distinguishes her skating now, which is total creative authority over her music selections, her costume designs, her choreographic choices, everything, with her coaches functioning as collaborators rather than commanders. And that distinction right there is the entire revolution, because this gala wasn't some spontaneous whim, but rather the exclamation point on everything she has been demonstrating since her return to the sport. And to truly grasp why all of this carries such weight, you have to revisit what happened on February 19th during the Olympic women's free skate, when Alisa stepped onto the ice in that radiant gold dress with her hair dyed in golden and brown streaks, and a lip piercing that signaled immediately this was not your conventional figure skater, but rather someone who had deliberately chosen her own identity. And as Donna Summer's MacArthur Park Sweet Disco track filled the arena, she executed 7 triple jumps and delivered 4 minutes of absolute uninhibited joy, finishing with a career-best score of 226.79 and that long-awaited gold medal. And what set the entire performance apart was what unfolded during the 6-minute warm-up beforehand, when Alisa was photographing her coaching staff, waving enthusiastically at the audience, and beaming at her relatives in the stands, while her fellow competitors stood rigid with concentration and nerves under the crushing weight of the most significant moment of their athletic careers. And after she completed her skate, she screamed into the camera, using an expletive to express exactly how she felt before flicking her ponytail at the final pose. And her coach Philip Dalmo had articulated it perfectly beforehand by saying she had not come to chase a medal, but simply to skate and savor the experience. Yet she claimed gold regardless, because as it turns out, joy consistently outperforms pressure. And this philosophy extended throughout every dimension of her preparation, including her training schedule, which CNN confirmed she manages entirely on her own timeline, even acknowledging she has occasionally overslept with no mandatory 8-hour sessions dictated to her. And in a CBS 60 Minutes interview, she stated plainly that nobody was going to starve her or dictate what she could or couldn't consume, meaning 0 dietary restrictions, 0 calorie monitoring, and 0 coaches policing her meals, with Philip de Gulmo acknowledging that for many years she had simply been delivered to the rink and told what to do, whereas now everything operates as a genuine collaborative partnership. And this context becomes even more striking when you remember this is the very same individual who walked away from the sport at 16, and whose father, Arthur Liu, had actually dismissed these same coaches on 2 separate occasions, including 3 months before the Beijing Olympics. So when Alisa returned to skating in 2024, she selected these coaches herself and established her conditions, making it unambiguously clear it would be a collaborative arrangement, or she simply would not participate. And the coaches accepted because they had witnessed firsthand what had occurred when collaboration was absent and had watched her abandon the sport entirely. And Alisa herself has openly described her childhood as a blur where skating and competing and going home all melted together into an indistinguishable mass, with many, many moments where she felt no enjoyment whatsoever. And when the pandemic shuttered the rinks, she confessed she realized for the first time what resting actually felt like and discovered she genuinely enjoyed not skating, which tells you everything about how traditional coaching had hollowed out her relationship with the sport. And so at 16, she stepped away not from exhaustion with skating itself, but from exhaustion with being perpetually controlled and told what to consume and where, and when and how to train, with every single decision stripped from her hands. But when she returned 2.5 years later, she arrived with one non-negotiable condition, which was that she would be the one in charge this time around. And what she ultimately demonstrated is that conventional coaching orthodoxy, which insists athletes require iron-fisted control and marathon training sessions and lives surrendered entirely to the sport, is simply not the only pathway to Olympic gold, because she trained whenever she felt ready, occasionally slept in, ate whatever appealed to her, chose her own music, and still stood on the top step of the podium. And fellow champions took notice, with 3-time Olympic gymnastics champion Ali Raymond observing that something genuinely magical happens when you actually listen to an athlete about what feels authentic for them and empower them to keep making those choices. And what every young skater watching witnessed was someone claiming Olympic gold without sacrificing their childhood or their identity or their joy. Someone who showed up with platinum blonde highlights and a lip piercing and disco music and pop remixes, and still won. And this stands in stark contrast to the devastation witnessed 4 years earlier with the Russian skating program under Ettore Tutberidze, where teenage athletes were crumbling under the pressure, and 15-year-old Kamila Valieva became entangled in a doping scandal, while young competitors broke down completely. Making Alisa the living antidote, embodying warmth and competitors genuinely celebrating one another, and joy replacing fear. So this story extends far beyond one athlete, because it represents a fundamental rethinking of how young athletes ought to be developed, with joy superseding pressure and personal autonomy superseding rigid control, and genuine partnership superseding dictation. And traditional coaching structures nearly made Alisa another cautionary tale, since she did retire at 16, before returning at 20 on entirely her own terms and winning, proving definitively that control does not manufacture champions, but that freedom does. And so, after screaming her expletive-laced celebration into the camera and flicking her ponytail, and 2 days later skating to a Gen Z pop anthem in a jeweled dress and going viral in the process, she has established a brand new blueprint. And with the World Championships in Prague approaching, where she will defend her title, the question is no longer whether joy can beat pressure, because she already answered that at the Olympics, but whether this signals a permanent transformation in the way figure skating, and perhaps all elite sport, understands what it truly takes to reach the very top.